They said she was unclean, dangerous, wicked because her heart chose the wrong man. Clara Whitmore had never broken a rule in her life. She wore her Sunday dresses past the ankle, tied her hair into a ribbon the way her mother had, and never spoke when her father spoke first. In the eyes of the town, she was perfection personified, a preacher's daughter raised with obedience and grace, always smiling, always quiet, always proper, but none of that mattered once they found out who she loved. Noah Blackstone had worked the stables behind Marston's estate since he was 16. 26 now, he'd grown into the kind of man who spoke rarely, but never without weight. His skin was the color of river stone after rain, his eyes dark and clear, his hands strong from shoeing horses and taming the mean ones no one else could approach. Orphaned young, he lived on the edge of the town's tolerance tolerated only. Because he made rich men's animals worth riding, Clara met him during one of her errands bringing her father's horse for a reshoeing. She remembered the way he looked at the animal first, not her, how his hands moved with care, how he murmured to the horse under his breath, like they shared a language. It took 2 more visits before he finally looked her in the eyes, the way. He said her name once, soft, like it wasn't a sin to speak. It set her bones alight. Their love wasn't fast. It was quiet, secretive, built between hymns and dusty barns. In the hush of twilight prayers and under stars no one else bothered to name. Sometimes she'd sneak out of the house in her riding cloak and meet him by the old well. Other times, he'd leave a horseshoe at the back gate cold, smooth, a wordless message that he was waiting. They never touched in public, never held hands. But their eyes did enough, she told him once, under the stable's rafters, that she dreamed of a different kind of life. One where she wasn't someone else's symbol of purity. He listened, leaning against the wall, his thumb tracing the dust on her wrist. "Then let's build that life," he whispered. "But dreams don't keep secrets for long in towns that choke on righteousness." The letter arrived without a name, folded in half, sealed with wax. Her father read it aloud in their kitchen, voice shaking with disgust. "Your daughter has defiled her family," it said, "consorting in the dark with that stable hand. Do not let sin root in your house." Clara didn't deny it. That night, hands dragged her from her bed, men from the church she once taught Sunday school in. They said she needed to be cleansed, that the devil used beauty to tempt good men. She screamed once and then bit her tongue bloody to stay silent. Her father watched with stone eyes as they locked her in the cellar beneath the church. She sat in that dark place for days, no windows, only the scent of mold and old hymn books. Sometimes someone would bring her bread and water and mutter a verse under their breath. Most days they brought nothing. On the 4th night, she heard the knock. 3 taps, soft, deliberate. She crawled to the window, a tiny slit of stone no wider than her fist, and pressed her ear to it. "I'm here," came Noah's voice, rough. Tired, alive. She whispered his name. "They tried to kill me," he said. "They came with ropes?" "Go," she said, tears streaking dirt on her cheeks. "You have to live for both of us." "I'll come back," he said, "even if I have to break the sky." She stayed at the window long after he was gone. Noah made it as far as the next state before they caught him 4 townsmen and a local lawman with a warrant scribbled in haste. Inciting immorality, they called it. Crossing borders without cause. Truth was, they didn't need a reason. Not for someone like him. They chained him, beat him in front of strangers, put him on a wagon headed for a prison camp no one in Clara's town ever mentioned out loud. A place where men were worked till their backs broke and their voices turned to ash. He survived. But something inside him cracked like a bone set wrong. He stopped believing in fairness. He started counting names. And in the deepest part of him, under the bruises and betrayal, one voice remained hers, whispering through the stone. Live for both of us. They thought chains would silence him, but each link just gave him a name to remember. Noah Blackstone had always known how to endure. Life had taught him that early, when to speak, when to disappear, when to bow his head, and when to hold it high enough to make others uncomfortable. But nothing in his 26 years prepared him for Blackridge Penitentiary. It wasn't a prison as much as it was a forgotten corner of the world where men went to vanish. The train that took him there didn't carry passengers, only bodies, and names that had been scratched out by lawmen and landlords. And once you passed through the rusted gates, they didn't call you by your name, just numbers, just colors, just silence. The first week was bone-breaking labor, shoveling gravel under the noonday sun, hauling stones for a wall that never seemed to end. Noah's wrists bled where the iron cuffs rubbed against skin. He didn't speak unless he had to. Not out of fear, but preservation. Every word was a match, and he couldn't waste fire. Guards singled him out early. A tall black man with a calm mouth and steady eyes drew attention. They beat him for not breaking. They starved him for standing too straight. Once, a whip kissed his back for humming an old lullaby beneath his breath. The sound of laughter echoed after the pain. He did not sing again. The prisoners were divided by race and rank, a crude system built on old war bitterness and backroom politics. But one man moved between the groups without flinching, Harlan Creek, gray-bearded, wiry, and missing half a hand. Harlan had once scouted for the Union Army. Now he scouted for something else, the ones who still had fight left in them. "You look like a man who ain't done yet," he said one night, crouching beside Noah during a water break. Noah didn't reply. "That's good," Harlan said. "Talking too soon gets you killed, so does staying too quiet." That night, Noah found a note under his cot. Just 4 words scribbled on burlap, "Watch the guard's feet." From then on, Harlan taught him in fragments. How to time your breath when the lash comes. How to hide a shard of bone inside a boot sole. How to read the eyes of a man who wants to kill you, and the man who might help you survive. Harlan didn't believe in miracles, but he believed in leverage. And knowledge was the sharpest blade in a place full of blunt force. Noah started listening more than he slept. He memorized guard rotations, studied the ledgers left open on the desk when no one was looking, watched which inmates were fed more and who got their letters faster. The system wasn't just broken, it was bleeding. But still, no word from Clara, no news, no sound. He feared she was gone, buried in some forgotten corner of that judgmental town. Then, one night during a rare chapel visit granted to keep the prison's image clean, a boy arrived. Pale, skinny, shaking hands, a preacher's son doing missionary work. Noah caught his sleeve as he passed. "Please," he whispered. "The preacher of Willow Hill, does he still preach? Does he have a daughter?" The boy hesitated. I don't know. Noah pressed harder. "Please." Later that night, he found something folded into the cuff of his shirt, a scrap of hymnal paper, torn and crumpled. On it, written in a rushed, uneven hand, "Still breathing, still yours." Noah sat with that note pressed to his chest for what felt like hours. He didn't cry, he didn't pray. He just let the silence inside him shift, like something sacred had returned. From an old nail, he twisted a link of chain loose from his own cuff, bent it, and braided it into a thin cord of fabric and wire. He hung it around his neck, a reminder, a promise. His voice forged without words. Months passed. The work grew harder. The guards crueler. Men died in the fields without names, their bodies fed to dust and heat, but Noah endured. Not because he believed in hope, but because he remembered her voice through the cellar grate. "You have to live, for both of us." Then came the riot. No one knew who started it, maybe Harlan, maybe not. But one morning during a transport, something exploded near the outer gate. Fire lit the horizon, horses screamed, bullets flew. Harlan shoved Noah to the ground as a guard drew his gun. "Run," he growled, dragging him behind a broken wagon. "Don't waste what she gave you." A shot rang out. Harlan slumped. Noah crawled through the chaos, past burning wagons and bleeding men. He didn't look back, didn't think, just moved. By dusk, he'd made it to the edge of the desert. His shirt was torn, his leg bleeding, chains still clinking from his wrists. Like ghost music, he wrapped them tighter so they wouldn't slow him down. He walked into the open land, where the wind had no master and the sky didn't judge. Step after step, dust in his teeth, breath shallow but steady. He wasn't whole. But he wasn't broken anymore. He was becoming something else. something the town would never see coming. No one recognized him at first, but the town felt it, the weight of justice walking in dust. Willow Hill hadn't changed much in the years Noah was gone. The trees still leaned toward the river like they were trying to leave, and the church bells still rang every morning whether the pews were full or not, but the people had quieted. Not because they'd grown kinder, just colder. Whispers replaced outright judgment, and the new mayor gave smoother speeches than the last, but everyone still kept their eyes down when they passed the preacher's house, especially when they looked up at the attic window. Clara Whitmore lived. Up there now, the preacher's daughter turned shameful echo. They'd released her months after Noah disappeared, when the town decided it had done enough penance on her behalf. But they never really let her go. She wasn't allowed to teach or speak in church or be seen walking alone. Her hair had been cut short, a punishment, her presence limited to family dinners and background shadows. The attic had one small window, facing the west, and every sunset she'd sit there and wonder if the light touched him too, wherever he was. On the day the town held its centennial celebration, bunting flapped over shop fronts and children ran through the square with ribbons in their hands. A brass band played near the church steps, and the preacher stood in his pulpit, voice raised high, calling for unity, legacy, and God's mercy. The doors opened halfway through the sermon. A gust of dry air swept in, carrying the smell of dust. And something older, something sharp. Noah Blackstone stood there, hat in hand, coat draped over one shoulder, the glint of old chain tucked just beneath the fabric. His shoulders were broader now, his skin darker from sun and toil, and his eyes, they were colder. Not cruel, just done pretending to be small. The preacher's voice caught mid-sentence. A hush fell over the congregation like someone had laid a cloth over the room. Clara, seated in the choir balcony, stood so suddenly her hymn book clattered to the floor, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen his face in 3 years, but she knew the shape of him the moment the door opened. Below, the sheriff shifted in his seat, jaw clenched. He stood and approached the aisle with measured steps. "You need to leave," he said. "This is a house of God." Noah met his eyes. Then God should hear the truth. From beneath his coat, he pulled a weathered leather case. Inside, prison logs, letters stamped and returned unopened. Signed affidavits from former guards. Evidence of labor abuses, assaults, men beaten to death for nothing but silence. He stepped forward and placed the case at the foot of the altar. "I'll leave once someone answers for this," he said. The preacher looked down, face pale. No one moved. Noah turned, walking out just as slow as he'd entered. That night, the whispers came back louder. Some called him dangerous. Others said he looked like a man risen from the grave. But there were some quiet voices who didn't speak in fear, but curiosity. Over the next week, he began to meet with them, not in public, never where the sheriff could see. Behind barns, under lantern-lit porches, in the broken-down smithy by the river where no one went anymore. He didn't shout, he taught. Showed them how systems were built to keep them quiet, how even the smallest voice could crack stone if aimed right. The town's young men listened. First, then the daughters of servants. Then a boy whose mixed parentage made him invisible in his own home. They came not for vengeance, but for understanding, because they'd never been offered any before. Clara watched from her window each night, his silhouette a memory come back to life. One evening she crept down the attic steps barefoot, and slipped out the back door, cloak around her shoulders, moonlight at her back. He was waiting behind the forge. She didn't speak, just stepped into him, wrapped her arms around his ribs, and held on like the world might vanish again. "I thought you died," she whispered. "I did," he murmured. "But you pulled me back?" They met like that every night. Her fingers in his shirt, his forehead resting against hers. Words passed between them in quiet fragments, each one undoing a little of what time and hate had tried to erase. In the dark, beyond the reach of their father's words and the town's judgment, they remembered who they were. And they began planning what came next. They thought they broke them apart. Instead, they made them fireproof. The flames started just after midnight. Noah's stable, the one he'd rebuilt with his own hands behind the old smithy, caught fire like dry paper. It wasn't an accident. The way the oil was poured, the matches left behind it, was a message, the kind that didn't need words. They wanted him gone again. Only this time, permanently. Noah woke, choking on smoke, his eyes stinging as the ceiling above him groaned. He kicked through the door and stumbled into the dirt, coughing hard, the chain around his neck still hot from the heat. The horses were already gone, loosened and sent running by someone who, despite everything, had mercy. Or guilt. He didn't scream. He didn't ask why. He just stood barefoot in the ashes, skin blistered at the shoulder, and watched his home burn to the ground. By morning, the town was buzzing, but pretending not to be. No one claimed it. No one condemned it, either. The preacher hadn't said a word, but his silence weighed more than 100 sermons, but it wasn't. Noah the town saw first that day. It was Clara. She stood on the front steps of the church as the bell rang for morning worship, her hair loose. For the first time in years, her white dress dust-streaked and torn at the hem. She didn't flinch when the doors opened behind her. She didn't move when her father emerged from the shadows. "You locked me away for love," she said, voice ringing down the street, "but I was freer in a cellar than in your lies." Gasps followed her words like ripples. A mother pulled her child close. A man took off his hat. And the preacher, for once, had no scripture ready to throw that afternoon. The town gathered in the old assembly barn, called by scandal and the mayor's sudden resignation. There was supposed to be a vote, an orderly transition, but what they got instead was a reckoning. Noah walked in first coat, scorched, sleeves rolled, a bandage wrapped around his forearm. Clara followed beside him, shoulders back, eyes forward. They didn't take the podium. They walked straight to the center of the floor. Clara unrolled a stack of papers, tattered, ink blurred, some barely legible, and began to read. She read about Blackridge Penitentiary, about the men buried without names, about the letters marked "Returned to Sender" and never shown to her. She read the day and hour her father condemned her in writing, the night he signed off on Noah's arrest, the sermon he gave the next day about purity, sin, and silence, and then she stopped. "I was told to forget him," she said, her voice softer now, but no less steady. "To live as if he never existed. But when I tried to forget, I realized something. I was never really alive until I met him." The barn was quiet. Hot dust floated in beams of fading sunlight. No one shifted. No one whispered. Her father stood. Then, pale, shaking, but not from age. "From loss. She's confused," he said, trying to reclaim the floor. "She's still my daughter, and I've forgiven her. We've all forgiven her." Clara turned slowly. "You may be my blood," she said, "but you are not my truth." There it was, final, sharp. He tried to speak again, but no one listened. No one moved to help him down from the steps. For the first time in decades, the town let him stand alone. He walked out of the barn with no one at his side. No eyes followed him, no hands waved. Just footsteps on wood that sounded more hollow than any prayer he'd ever given. The vote never happened. Or maybe it did, in silence. In the way people began walking over to Noah after that. In the way they looked Clara in the eye instead of at her feet. No applause. No speeches, just the slow turning of a town that had spent too long lying to itself. And outside, the wind moved through the ashes of the stable, scattering them across the road, like a warning and a beginning. The school stood where the river bent low and the wildflowers grew in clusters no one had ever tried to tame. It wasn't grand, just a long wooden hall with windows that opened wide and floors that creaked with every step, but it was built by their hands, plank by plank, with the kind of care that only comes from fire-forged beginnings. They opened the doors in spring. At first, only a few children came, those whose names had been forgotten in town records, those too poor or too brown or too quiet to ever be called promising, a girl with one shoe, a boy who stuttered, a half-Choctaw orphan whose mother had died cleaning the mayor's house. They came barefoot, hungry, nervous. Clara greeted each one with a smile and a place to sit. Noah taught them how to listen to the wind and the sound of hooves, how to draw letters with charcoal and read laws meant to silence them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Above the doorway hung a melted piece of iron, curved and hammered into shape by Noah's own hand. The same chains once fastened to his wrists were now twisted into the words, "Freedom forged here." Some townsfolk never crossed the new fence, still called it a folly, still whispered at church. But others, many began to nod in passing. A grocer left flour on the porch once a week. The old doctor donated books. A few parents, stiff with pride, sent their children anyway. And the wind, somehow, began to change direction. One afternoon, long after the last child had left, and the bell's echo had faded into birdsong, Clara sat beneath the tree by the river with her feet tucked beneath her skirt. The sun melted through the leaves in soft golden flecks. Noah sat beside her, sleeves rolled, hands scarred but steady. "They tried to erase us," she said, voice low, "but love don't vanish. It roots." He looked at her, eyes soft beneath the years. "Let it grow." She was no longer the preacher's daughter, and he was no longer the boy in chains. Together they became something the town could never bury.